no live music, no live music jam, and he selected all the speakers for this afternoon. There are 6 speakers whom I will introduce individually. Each speaker, stipulated again by Dan, will speak for 5 to 7 minutes. 5 to 7 minutes. And share what they will. Our first speaker is Eric Garcia.
I want to start by saying that I paid Dan $1,000 to be on this list, so I got some value for my money. I'm going to tell a few stories. But I think I've known him for 35 years, and he put up with me for 35 years, and I put up with him for 35 years. But I've got a little list that I made of specific stories and things that we did. I was at his house one day, and the phone rang. And there was a British guy on the phone. He asked for Dan, and I said, "Who's calling?" And he said, "It's Peter." And it was Peter Gabriel. And I went, "Holy shit." There was another time, Dan had a grapefruit-sized tumor in his body. And when he came back from the hospital, he was in pain and he was messed up. But and there was another person who's sitting back there who was there, and they remember it differently. But during this period where he was on pain pills and wasn't quite there, he changed and he levitated, and I had never seen anything like that prior. And for a moment, he was a completely holy man. When we talked about it later, he didn't really quite remember the circumstance, but he was speaking in such a way and knowing things that maybe he couldn't know. And I was going, I don't know that I believe in this. I don't know that this is real, but I'm here and I'm seeing that. It was an incredible occasion that I'll always remember. The other thing I learned from Dan was about the fundamental, about bass tone. And he was the first guy of all the bass players I heard that actually had fundamental. And what he taught me there in bass tone and with subwoofers is that you could make a bass tone that you didn't necessarily feel, that you didn't necessarily hear, but you could feel, and that you could support things with just moving air. And that really changed me. And the basses, the instruments, all of the equipment that he had, it was incredible. And he hated me saying this, but I made myself a Dan Schwartz model, a Music Man with a graphite neck. And I called it my Dan bass, and he just hated it. But in the end, he had a spare strap that was exactly like the strap on his Music Man that he gifted me, so I think he liked that. He also, years ago, demanded that I buy a U-47, that I buy a CAN-54s, that I get Telefunken D-72s. He made me buy really good mics and preamps and things like that. He would come to my little ADAT studio, and it always sounded like crap, except when he was there, he'd come in with his good stuff, and his recording sounded better than anything that happened there. The other beautiful thing that he turned me on to, at 51 I had a nervous breakdown, and I was doing 3 times a week therapy, but Dan was always telling me that I would really benefit from psychedelic therapy. So he sent me to his therapist, and for 3 years, every quarter, I would do psychedelic therapy. And it was the most liberating, painful, eye-opening thing. And he had done it prior, and as I was telling a friend earlier, he had, in his last journey, he said he met Jesus, and Jesus said, "You're done." So he stopped. And so I started, and I was so grateful for that experience, because the things that I learned and the pain within that was able to come out, I never could have gotten to through talk therapy, so I'm grateful for that. The other thing that we did together that was really special is many years ago, probably 10 years plus, he found an article in the Weekly about the 10 best Chinese restaurants in San Gabriel Valley. So every Saturday, we'd go down the list and we'd drive to San Gabriel Valley and we would try Chinese restaurants. And I got turned on to how different. I didn't particularly like Chinese food, but Chinese food in the San Gabriel Valley, which has, I think, the largest population of Chinese people in the United States, unbelievable restaurants going for miles. And we tried fancy ones and divey ones. We landed up with two of our favorite. One is called JTYH, which I highly recommend, and Cam Hong Gardens. So we did that, and then we would see other ones across the street. There'd be a vegan one, so that was really a beautiful thing, and we kept it up for years. I'd come snatch them up, and then when he was sick, we would have a group of friends that we call the Silver Lake Chowder and Marching Society that would come over on Saturday afternoons, and we'd play acoustic music in that incredible, I'm sure you know his living room had just unbelievable acoustics. And when he was well enough, we'd all steal away and we'd head out to a Chinese restaurant, and we have lots of pictures, and we did that as well. I had the pleasure of being in two bands with him. The first band was very short-lived and very contentious, but his friend Keith Levine came to LA, and we formed a band, and a couple of the members of the band were so completely insane, including Keith, that it was very short-lived, but it was incredible to see these two brilliant guys, quirky as shit, one really self-destructive and one Dan, and to be able to play. So there's a track I put up, I think when Dan died, on Facebook. One day we came in and we had a sketch of a 2-chord tune, and Keith, who wouldn't tune a guitar, he'd hand it to you and say, tune it. We just handed him a guitar, we turned the track on, he played one pass, and Dan brought his V72s over and plugged into that and did a pass. And the whole thing was just a jam. And I put that up when he died, and that was on Facebook. The other one was a band called Color Out of Space, which was originally called Psychedelic Jerry. And it was a complete jam band. There was no material. We would just, sometimes we'd sound incredible, sometimes we'd sound horrible. But we did a residency at a place called Bob's Espresso Bar, which was in North Hollywood, and we were there once a month. And it was the most beautiful, incredible, sometimes unbelievably delicate. I remember there was a time when we were playing, and it was just madness, huge madness. And I remember thinking, I cannot believe I'm actually making noise in this gorgeous madness. It's as big and as beautiful as things could be. The owner of that club was an actor named Bob Romanos, who was so lovely that he cared so much about the music that when we would play there, if people were talking in his espresso bar, he would ask them to go sit outside. And if you were going to be there, you had to be quiet to listen. So obviously, it was not a place that was going to stay open for very long. But during those it was a year and a half, we had a band called the Silver Lake Trio. But the other thing that we all brought little tiny amps to this thing, and Dan, of course, brought his Henry 8x8, which I'd always have to help him pull out of the Volvo wagon. This huge cabinet, and it wasn't loud, but it just made this glorious bottom end that it was like an earthquake, and that was so Dan was an earthquake. The other thing that we love to do is we go to NAMM together, and every year we go up to the Bösendorfer exhibit piano, and we would take turns playing the lowest note on the Bösendorfer, and one of us would stick our head in to listen to the low frequencies, and then we would switch place. So that was our ritual. And then, when we came back, we would stop at El Teviac. So another wonderful thing. One of the great things I learned about Dan is it seemed to me that from the day he was born, he was just an incredibly self-confident man. He was fearless. He would, as a teen, walk up to Rick Turner and think of him as a peer. So one of the things I learned from him and watching him play, I remember I saw Tuesday Night Music Club with Linda Perry playing, and he played a fretless Steinberger on his knees. And the band, Tuesday Night Music Club, one of the best bands that ever lived, unbelievable musicians. Bill is here, Brian's here. But the sound of the band, but the sound of the bottom, I learned about how he could be this magnificent low end that wasn't loud, but was bigger than anything. It was bigger than an elephant. It was bigger than a rhino. And it was sort of like the Buddha sitting at the bottom of this stuff. And there was so much to learn from watching his absolute fearlessness in each note, the length of each note, where he placed it, the importance of just the individual note, being a guitar player, but a bass player too, but a guitar player, we're nat noting around. And here was a man that understood about making a brush stroke, the most beautiful brush stroke that you might ever have. My last thing, because I'm probably close to time, and many of you know this about him, he was the most incredible disc jockey. You'd go over, and he would come up with a playlist that was things you had never heard. And not only would he just blow your mind with classical music, with Glenn Gould, with all of this stuff, but he would have all of the backstories, and this was recorded here, and this was done like that, and it was just fabulous. So we would play sometimes, and when he got really ill, and we would put an instrument on him, and he could sort of play, but when he got too weak to do that, we would just go and be three Jews and a goy, and he would be the DJ for us, and we'd hear incredible stuff that we knew, stuff we didn't know. So that was his last bit of love. So I just want to say, this in my life was the most incredible man I ever knew. Thank you.
Lou, after?
First time I met Dan, he screamed at me. And little did I know that this was a propitious start to a wonderful friendship. He screamed because we had just moved in across the street, and the contractor who was doing something in our new home was blocking his exit from his driveway. And I thought, oh shit, this is our new neighbor. I realized that there was between us an incredible overlapping Venn diagram. I'm not a musician. I only played a flutophone and a kazoo. Dan was a consummate musician, and yet there was an incredible serendipitous overlap between us, and I think the serendipity kind of scared me. That here was someone who I got and he got me, and just through the serendipity of randomly moving across the street, there we were together. And I'll return to this fear, this scariness in a minute, but I just want to share a couple of vaguely amusing stories that kind of encapsulate, an impossible task, I think, to encapsulate Dan, but that encapsulates something about Dan's character. Not long after I moved in, he ran over to our house and banged on the door and said, "Luke, you have to come over right now." I'm like, I'm in my running shorts and sweaty t-shirt, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I run over, and he says, "Sit down right here." And he sits me down on the couch, and he said, "This is the memory player." And I said, "What's that?" And then he proceeded to give me a 10-minute explanation of this brilliant piece of technology, and the fact that I understood 100% of what he was saying, I think, was remarkable to him. So one of the overlapping circles was the overlapping circles of global geekery. So here I found myself living across the street from a consummate geek, and I think he was kind of shocked too, that we could speak to each other even though we had a void of lack of professional overlap. There was a lot we shared in common. So I'm sitting there listening to the memory player, which is kind of a remarkable machine, it turns out. And it was very important for him that I understood what the meaning of this device was. And so he explained to me, and here's someone who because of lousy arena rock in the 70s, my hearing is blasted. You know, back in the day, we would never wear earplugs, and so the next day in high school, it was always like a badge of honor, like, yeah, man, my ears are still ringing. So suddenly, as a middle-aged man, some hearing loss, sitting in Dan Schwartz's sofa, listening to Wendy Carlos, a CD, and the memory player is a subversive bit of technology. It completely circumvents how digital analog works, and what it helps recover is this sort of living presence that you can find in LP. And so here I am, half deaf, and I'm sitting there, and I realize he's right. And it was a remarkable moment for me. Even with my crappy hearing, I was able to understand what the importance of this device that I could never dream of owning. But in any event, it was a remarkable moment for me, a recovering audiophile, now deaf, to be able to experience it. Towards the end of his life, I wanted to do something for Dan, and what can you do for somebody other than hold their hand and talk to them? And he had plenty of hand holding and talking around him. But what is some simple thing you can do for somebody? And I thought, well, Ellen explained to me that he had stopped eating, and eating was difficult for him because his teeth were problematic and his esophagus was messed up. So eating was a real challenge. And I thought, well, what can I make this man who I love, that he might be able to take a bite of? So I made him rice pudding, not realizing that he adored rice pudding. It was something we, for whatever reason, never shared. He loved rice pudding. And much to Ellen and Claire's surprise, he ate a lot of rice pudding. And it's one of these banal moments in your life where you realize you do something simple for somebody and you have no idea what the resonance is going to be. But it was to be able to give someone in the very last moments of their life something that was gratifying for me. Anyway, the coda of this very droll story is that as I'm leaving, he whispers to me, "Next time, no raisins." I think that kind of encapsulates something essential about Dan. That he was a very contradictory soul, very fierce, very savage, but also very loving and very open. And I think it was that openness that kind of scared me. And I regret being scared. I think I was afraid of what I was feeling, and I think that kept me away from him more than I should have. And Dan, I apologize for that. I love you very much, and I wish I had had the presence of mind and emotional presence of mind to see through that fear, but that here's someone who gets you, and I got him. So.
Sarah Kramer. I've never done this before, so I'm going to be reading to be sure to not exceed the time. I printed it very well. Dan felt like someone I'd always known, like a brother or a childhood friend, even though he was born years ahead of me. I couldn't figure out if it was that we were a lot alike, or our backgrounds were alike, or our musical taste. I didn't think too hard on it,
but he always felt like some kind of family. Family in the sense of trust and supportive, truly wishing the best for one another while each making it through whatever challenges life includes. It's rare to have male friends that are true friends on equal footing, just being a human being with another human being. Dan was like that, no hidden agenda. I was always amazed by his existence, that his parents had survived the Holocaust. It was crazy to me that one of my friend's parents could have lived through and survived that, something I'd learned about in history books and seemed so long ago. Every child is a miracle, but that kind of survival is quite something. He once invited me to tag along to his friend's Seder, and of course it was lively, and there was a huge photo of Ram Dass on the wall. Spirituality, not necessarily religion. Vibration, astrology. Dan loved the stars, planets, galaxies, and aliens. Those were what resonated. He was a spiritual thinker and interested in the depths of the mind, with and without hallucinogens. Nature in all of its bounty, plants and creatures alike, Dan seemed to cherish what planet Earth has to offer, especially animals. Celebrating his life so close to the zoo seems fitting, and even here in the old zoo where we're the animals. Not the captivity part, but the overall creation and existence of so many animals. Dan had said, "I wish people wouldn't eat animals, and we didn't need money." While in many ways Dan remained childlike, which I say with the utmost respect, staying true to his lifelong interests in comic books, records, instruments, movies, books, and his strong opinions, it seemed he found ways and was blessed to live without the pressures of adult responsibilities, as if he was always on holiday. Not that he was irresponsible, but he just didn't seem to have that burden. Maybe because both his amazing and strong wife, Ellen, and daughter, Claire, picked up the slack. I know he loved them both dearly. He told me a number of times how from the very first time he saw Ellen at a party they attended, he thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And I think he felt that way throughout their life. I know he admired her, and that he could not be more proud of their daughter Claire, and the fact that he had them both as his family, in a home full of bunnies. Bunnies on the loose, with hay everywhere, like an urban barn of sorts, but clean and orderly in a classic mid-century modern type home with a view overlooking water and trees, somewhat wild. And I love that the bunnies, or some of them, are here today. I think Dan lived with delight. I'm grateful that our paths crossed, that we were friends, made music together, and that he was so open with me. I'll wrap this up with a Yiddish-like word that he made up and used often. Groovlichkeit. I think that may sum up how he felt about life. I think he was pleased with life and smiled about it.
They didn't tell me where the bathroom was, but I really needed it. Try to make this quick. Danny, everybody knows. I'm assuming that everybody here knows Danny Schwartz. Everybody knows who he was and what he was about, sort of. I knew him. He came into my life as a musician, as a bass player. And I have had the good fortune in my career to play with some of the really, really great bass players in the world. And Danny, I always told Danny that he was one of those guys. And he didn't quite believe me. He thought I was just kind of pumping him up. But the records that he left behind, especially the one with Cheryl and Bill Petro, who's here today, and Brian, the drummer, and That's still one of the great records. And that's Danny Schwartz playing bass. Danny was, for me, he was as I got to know him better later, I found that, he was a complicated guy, in that, I always wanted to help him. I always wanted to take him with me on session and play. And I had this conversation with the guys here today who know him really well. That Danny had no filter for certain things, like the truth. The truth had to be told no matter what or how or in front of who. And so I personally loved that about him. But after his sessions sometimes when we'd be driving home, I tried to explain to him that, Danny, you don't want to, what I was taught when I first started doing sessions, the importance of making sure that the people you're working with understand that you're there for them, and you're playing the bass. There's another guy called the producer. They call him the producer, and then the artist. You're there to really pump them up, make them feel great, and do the best you can for them. And Danny, he understood that, but he just, if he saw that something was askew, he could not help himself from bringing it up and making an issue out of it. And it, it sometimes it made it difficult for the people they would lose faith, in themselves a little bit, and I tried to explain to them that's really important, to make sure that people, that you're really on their side, that they know you're on their side when you're in the studio. But that was, I never knew anybody like that in my life other than Danny. I couldn't believe how talented he was, and yet how it didn't seem to bother him that maybe somebody wouldn't call him back. There was stuff like that about Danny Schwartz that I really loved. I don't know whether I loved it or I was fascinated by it. I'm not sure, but anyway, I just loved the guy. I loved our conversations. It's already been spoken about. He was a tone master. He loved tone, and he would talk about it in such a way that it was fascinating. And he was known for his tone on the bass, as a bass player. But during the time when he started to get sick, I realized that we weren't really talking about music as much anymore. We were talking about all kinds of other things, life and stuff, and it was amazing to me because we used to argue about different things. I shouldn't say argue really, because I never felt like I was arguing, but I loved his outlook on so many different things. It was different. It was different than mine, and it was different than a lot of people's, I think. But I loved the conversations. So I'll wrap this up by saying that the last conversation I had with him, he said, "I'm really looking forward to seeing my mom." And that just floored me. For many reasons. And the older I get, the easier it is for me to cry. And but I'm not going to cry about that. I'll leave you with that. I think he was a really, really extraordinary guy and a fantastic friend to have. And having said that, I'm looking forward to hearing Bill Bottrell, what he has to say.
Bill Bottrell?
Got my notes. So this seems to be a music-heavy crowd. Is that possible, or is it me? Makes sense, of course. Although there have been other Dan-centered get-togethers I've been at, where there was a different sort of mix of things. So Dan put this guest list together, right? I think he had a plan for this. So, you know, art, Dan, art, you know, compared to me, art, Dan is Mr. The Art. He is the art. He knows the art. He accesses the art. He promotes the art. Dan was the art in my life. But he didn't make sculptures in his backyard or paint paintings, although he claimed to have started out painting paintings and then moved over to music. And music was apparently how he made art material. But there was a bigger thing that I felt was there with Dan. It was his constant desire, quest, appreciation, desire to experience the artful. So his quest for the artful took him all over the place in his spirit. He used to corral me and get me to do things that would not have been on my radar. For instance, going to the Hollywood Bowl to see Evelyn Glennie, the symphonic percussionist, for 2 hours solo. And yeah, on the ride home, my ex-wife said, "Well, what'd you think?" And I go, "Dan said it's good." The artful. But you see, what we did was we went to the Hollywood Bowl with Dan, and Greg Arreguin was there. That was the art of it. I mean, those shakers. But the artful for Dan was his universe. I mean, he, of anybody I ever met, could take the artful and translate it to the moment, the minutia of the day, a phone call, as well as guitar making or playing bass, audio gear, you know, music gear. We fought about that for all the years. I'm like, please, no gear talk. But it was artful. He would have no piece of gear that didn't have love in it. in his view. Anything that was defiantly uncorrupted was his art, and his appreciation of the artful in that. And so when he found himself in a situation that was corrupted by any number of things, as we all walk around daily, with putting up with corruptions, minor or major. Not Dan. Because why experience anything? If you can guide what you experience, or guide it once it's in your body to a place of purity and love, and be artful, that's a spirituality. Even in the context of a harsh and painful period in your life. So the funny thing is, there was the music, and it was my habit to always ask Dan his opinion of things, because it seemed to come from a higher place, a better place, an uncorrupted place. It came, it came out, and it never agreed with the other three people in the room. And so I would always ask his opinion, and I'd get it. And there were lots of songs, and so over the years I must have run 1,000 songs by him, and said, well, what do you think? And it took me years to find out that if he played on it, he fucking loved it. Otherwise, you should have. Anyway, love you, Dan. Amazing. Amazing spirit. Thanks all. Thanks all for coming.
I'm the last speaker, and so again, Dan is so looking down on us, looking at us, experiencing this at the same time, I hope. And yeah, it meant a lot to us, and thank you for all your words, everyone. It's so inspiring. It's hard to follow, but I'll do my best. About friendship, Anais Nin said, each friend represents a world in us, a world not born until they arrive, and it is only by this meeting that a new world is born. Now I'd like to talk about Dan's couch. I spent so many hours listening to music on that couch. And I would often sleep on that couch when I would visit him, either in the Los Feliz apartment or on Hidalgo on that couch. I met Dan in 1975. We were both music students at San Diego State University. I was a classical violinist, practicing 7 to 8 hours a day, probably, because I never really practiced before until I was 18. And Dan was this rock and roll bass player. And we met through a friend, and it was that thing that happens when you meet that person in your life. I think Sarah was speaking about that on this very deep human level. Everybody's been speaking about that, actually. He was in my heart always, no matter where I was in the world, no matter where I was living, I would always think about, I would hear something and I'd think, what Dan would think about that. And then I would see him sit on the couch, listen to music, because he had this amazing sound system, of course. And we would listen to something and then talk about it. So we were really coming from, well, different points of origin. I mean, it doesn't matter anymore because it was still music. And we would discuss the music, and we would discuss how we felt about it, what we heard. And then we would just discuss about different things in our lives, where we were in our lives. I remember I walked into his Los Feliz apartment, and there was Ellen sitting on that couch. And I said to him, as she left and went to her beautiful treehouse apartment, it's gorgeous too. And I said, Dan, that's the one. That's the one. And thankfully, she is the one. And then I would visit him. Then Dan and Ellen and George moved to the house on Hidalgo. And so I again would visit, and again I would sleep on the couch. And then wake up, and then we would listen to music again, or we would watch a film together and have many very, intense and deep discussions. And then I would go away, and maybe a year would pass, or maybe 2 years would pass. But I would always come back to that couch, and I would always come back at some point sleeping on that couch. And the last time I saw Dan, we were sitting, and this was a year ago, January, and we were sitting together on the couch, and no words. It was just us, and it was the couch, and it was that embrace. I loved him very much, and I miss him, but I'm so happy that he put this together, and I'm so happy that I have Claire and Ellen in my lives. So thank you very much. Thank you. Lee and Kelly for all of their help in making Dan's memorial as special as it has become. Also, Ben, Peter's son, Dan's brother Peter, is here, and Bob, Dan's brother Bob, are both here. In closing, I would like to ask David Melville to come up and please read Epitaph, a favorite poem by Merritt Malloy.
When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved, and if you cannot give me away, at least let me live on in your eyes and not on your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die. People do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
It really felt like rain too. Like, but now you get here. Before he said, "Agreement me, but don't distribute the ashes on the East Coast. It's too far."